I never thought the smell of my own house could feel so foreign. It was supposed to be a quiet Friday night. After 4 intense days at a medical symposium in Chicago, where I'd presented years of groundbreaking research on targeted cancer therapies, all I wanted was solitude, peace, my bed, a warm shower, cup of tea, and the quiet hum of home. But as the Uber rolled slowly down my street in Portland, delayed by a traffic jam of parked cars lining both curbs, my pulse began to rise. I thought maybe a neighbor was hosting a party. But as I got closer, I recognized the cars. That was Aunt Rose's cherry red SUV, Uncle Bill's camper van, my cousin Jackson's obnoxiously loud motorcycle. These weren't strangers. They were family, dozens of them, and they were all here. I wheeled my suitcase past unfamiliar voices echoing from the porch, past the blaring music, the muffled laughter that erupted from behind closed windows, and the blinking string lights, my string lights that had been pulled out of storage without my knowledge. I stood frozen in front of my own front door, trying to remember the last time someone had told me anything about reunion. Nothing came to mind. When I stepped inside, I felt like I'd walked into someone else's life. Shoes covered the entryway floor, none of them mine. Laughter exploded from the kitchen. Children I didn't recognize dashed past me, chasing each other with juice boxes in hand. I saw new photos framed and hanging on the walls. Group shots of relatives I hadn't seen in years. Extended family gatherings I had never been invited to. In not a single one was I present. I stood there with my suitcase still in hand, invisible in the house I helped pay for. Then I saw him, my brother Ethan. He walked out of the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks, his face lighting up when he spotted me, but not with joy, no, it was panic. Claire, his wife, was beside him. Her eyes darted toward me and then away, like I'd caught her in the middle of something she didn't want to explain. I finally found my voice. "What's going on?" "Oh," Ethan stammered. "You're early for what?" Claire smiled, lips tight. "The Mitchell family reunion. It's this weekend. Everyone's here." Everyone except me. That single word, echoing through the chaos around me, hit me harder than I could have imagined. I wasn't late. I hadn't been misinformed. I had been left out, erased, forgotten, or worse, deliberately excluded. Upstairs, I found strangers' luggage in my hallway. My bedroom, my sanctuary, was no longer mine. The bed smelled like cheap perfume. My research papers had been moved. A child's crayon drawing was taped over my framed PhD certificate. The antique perfume bottles my late grandmother gave me had been knocked over and shattered in the bathroom. Every corner of the apartment I helped renovate, every surface I had organized with care, had been touched, altered, disrespected. I stood alone, suffocating in my own home, surrounded by noise and people who hadn't even noticed I was missing until now. And then, like salt in a wound, my mother appeared. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look sorry. She smiled politely, then opened her arms as if this moment, this twisted charade of a welcome, was normal. "We thought you were flying in tomorrow," she said. I stared at her. Why didn't anyone tell me this was happening? She waved a hand dismissively. "You're always busy with work, Lauren. We figured you wouldn't mind. Let that sink in. I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind 99 people sleeping, eating, and celebrating in my home without telling me. I wouldn't mind that they moved my personal belongings, that someone else had slept in my bed, that no one even texted to ask for permission because I was always busy. Let me ask you something. What would you do if you came home and discovered that your own family didn't consider you part of the family? Would you scream? Would you cry? Or would you do what I did? Stand in silence while the weight of betrayal settled like concrete in your chest. Before we continue, if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own home or family, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support gives us the energy to share more stories that are raw, real, and deeply human. Because this isn't just about family drama. It's about boundaries, respect, and the moment you realize that blood doesn't guarantee love or loyalty. So here's a small question for you. Think about it carefully. If you found out your family planned a major reunion in your own home without telling you, what would you do? Stay calm and handle it legally and professionally. B. Confront them emotionally and demand answers right away. Type "I'll be" in the comments below. I want to know how you'd react, because what happened next in my story. It's about to test everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and how far I'd go to protect my peace. Let's continue. Growing up in the Mitchell household, love wasn't loud. It wasn't hugs at the door, or praise at the dinner table, or warmth radiating through everyday moments. It was subtle. If it showed up at all, you earned your place, proved your value, and maybe then you got a nod of acknowledgement. But even as a child, I knew the rules didn't apply to everyone equally. My brother Ethan didn't have to earn anything. He was the golden child, effortlessly charming, never exceptional, but always celebrated. When he got a B-, it was framed as perseverance. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected. My accomplishments were never questioned, never criticized, but never truly praised. I became the serious one, the focused one, and, over time, the distant one. But what they called distance was really defense, a quiet rebellion against a home where affection was distributed by favoritism, not fairness. Our mother, Diane, never hid her preferences. Ethan reminded her of our father, a little reckless, a little charming, someone who could laugh through mistakes and still be loved for them. I, on the other hand, was always measured, responsible, and too independent for her comfort. To her, I wasn't someone to be proud of. I was someone to tolerate, a daughter who asked too many questions, worked too many hours, and loved her career more than Sunday dinners. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being invisible in your own family. It's not loud, not dramatic, it's silent. A birthday card that arrives a day late, a missed call during your graduation. A photo album where your face appears less and less each year, and over time, you start to wonder, if I disappeared, how long would it take them to notice? Still, when Dad passed away suddenly, from heart failure, something cracked open in me. He had always been my quiet supporter, the one who left notes in my textbooks that said "I'm proud of you," who brought me tea during late-night study sessions without saying a word. When he was gone, I felt the shift. I wasn't just outnumbered, I was outmatched. Ethan stepped into Dad's shoes, or tried to. He became the unofficial head of the household, full of advice he didn't earn and authority he hadn't built. When Mom struggled with the mortgage, it was Ethan who proposed we buy the house together. A practical solution, he called it. He and his wife Claire would take the downstairs. Mom would live in the garage apartment we converted. And I was offered the renovated second floor. At the time, it felt like cooperation. I used a portion of my research fellowship to cover my half of the down payment. Ethan, with help from Claire's family, covered his. We signed co-ownership agreements suggested by my attorney, Barbara, who insisted on documenting boundaries and shared responsibilities. Ethan found it unnecessary. "We're family," he said, half laughing. "Why do we need contracts?" But deep down, I knew why. Because history repeats itself. And trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild itself with handshakes and hopeful thinking. For a while, things worked. We lived under the same roof, but rarely overlapped. I traveled often for research conferences, always letting them know in advance. They hosted dinners, posted photos with captions like "Love our cozy home" without ever tagging me. When I was there, I was barely visible. When I was gone, it was as if I didn't exist at all. Mom would drop by my apartment without notice, claiming it was her right. "I'm your mother, Lauren. I don't need permission to see you," she meant well, perhaps. But when someone constantly moves your books, comments on your decor, rearranges your schedule with their presence, it's hard to feel like your space is truly yours. And yet, I kept showing up. I attended family gatherings when I could, brought wine to dinners I wasn't expected at, smiled through conversations where Ethan talked for hours about his new real estate side hustle while no one asked about my clinical trial work. Last December, my name appeared in a prestigious medical journal feature about our lab's breakthrough in treatment-resistant lymphoma. Not one person in my family mentioned it. But when Ethan won a regional sales award for closing a life insurance deal, we threw a celebratory barbecue. That wasn't the first time I felt unseen, but it was the moment I stopped trying to be seen. So I focused on what I could control: my research, my apartment, my peace. I set clear boundaries, not to punish them, but to protect myself. I communicated in writing. I shared updates about travel. I asked for privacy in my space, but even as I did everything right, legal, respectful, logical, I could feel the subtle pushback. The quiet eye rolls, the passive-aggressive remarks at dinner, the sense that my presence was always a bit inconvenient. Still, when I learned I'd be speaking at the Chicago symposium, I sent Ethan a message right away. "I'll be out of town from Thursday to Sunday. Can you keep an eye on the house while I'm gone?" He replied almost instantly. "No problem. Have a good trip. House will be quiet this weekend." Quiet. That one word played like a cruel joke the moment I stood at the doorway days later, staring into the loudest, most invasive moment of my adult life. But the noise didn't begin that Friday night. It started years ago, with the silences, the dismissals, the favoritism. The stories rewritten to cast me as cold, detached, and unavailable when all I ever wanted was to be valued without having to shrink myself. The family dynamics didn't just hurt, they shaped me. They taught me how to disappear without ever leaving. How to hold my breath for the sake of peace, how to smile through being ignored. And now, finally, they had pushed me far enough that I would no longer be part of a legacy that required me to stay small in order to belong. Sometimes, the worst betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people who call you family while quietly building a life that excludes you. And when that betrayal is layered in decades of subtle rejection, it doesn't explode, it erodes. Until one day, you wake up and realize you've built a life trying to earn love from people who only ever offered conditional acceptance. And so, I stopped trying, I chose something else. But I'll tell you about that soon. When I first discovered the folder, it wasn't rage I felt, it was confirmation. A sick, settling stillness, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air shifts and you just know something irreversible is coming. I had been looking for a moment of quiet, maybe even some closure, after the house emptied out. The family reunion, the one I hadn't been invited to, had ended the day before, leaving behind a trail of wine-stained tablecloths, half-deflated balloons, and an emotional residue I couldn't scrub away. I'd returned late that Sunday evening, waiting until I knew they were gone. It was a kind of grief, walking through the remnants of a party that had taken place in your absence, in your own home. And then, in the closet wedged behind a collapsed stack of luggage, I saw it. A manila folder, bulging with papers that didn't belong to me. For a split second, I considered leaving it there. I could have claimed indifference, protected my peace. But curiosity, or perhaps instinct, had a louder voice that night. Inside were documents that told a story my brother Ethan had been trying to hide. Multiple mortgage refinancing attempts, maxed out credit card statements, denied loan applications from at least 3 different banks. A spreadsheet, poorly disguised as a business plan, outlining cash flow estimates from properties he never should have invested in. I didn't need a finance degree to understand the picture it painted. Ethan was drowning in debt, and suddenly, everything made sense. The forced reunion, the massive guest list, the sudden interest in reclaiming the house. His quiet suggestion, just 2 nights earlier, that maybe I'd consider selling my share because, as he so kindly put it, I was never really here anyway. The gathering had never been about family, it was about leverage. Creating an environment where I'd feel like the outsider, the obstacle, the one standing in the way of their comfort. It wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, that folder in my lap, feeling something shift inside me. Not sadness this time, not even betrayal. What I felt was focus. That strange, clear-eyed clarity that comes not when you're hurt, but when you're done being hurt. This wasn't just about my bedroom being used, or my belongings moved, or my name erased from the family photo wall. This was about a boundary crossed so completely that there was no going back. And the worst part, they didn't think I'd do anything about it. That was their first mistake. I spent the next few hours documenting everything. I took photos of the disarray in my apartment, the broken heirlooms, the rearranged furniture. I catalogued what had been moved, what had been damaged. I timestamped everything. Then I sent a short message to my attorney, Barbara, Need to discuss urgent property matters. Can you meet tomorrow? When we sat down the next day, Barbara listened closely, occasionally jotting notes or pausing to clarify details. She didn't overreact. That wasn't her style. But I saw her posture stiffen when I handed her the photos and laid out the financial documents I'd found. They used your space without consent, she said evenly. They violated the co-ownership agreement in at least 3 ways. And now they're trying to push you out, likely to cover Ethan's debt. I nodded. I don't want revenge. I want resolution, but I want it on my terms. Barbara smiled faintly. Then we'll play it smart. No yelling, no accusations, just structure, documentation, and pressure. She explained the options. I could force a sale, liquidate the property, divide the proceeds. Or I could keep my ownership and rent out my portion, legally and professionally. Either choice would send a clear message. I wasn't going to be manipulated. I wasn't going to disappear. I chose the second path. By the end of the week, I'd partnered with a high-end property management firm. They would oversee my space, find vetted tenants, and serve as the middleman in all future interactions. Everything would be handled in writing, no more hallway conversations or dinner table ambushes. I also had a quiet meeting with a financial advisor. We reviewed every shared expense, every grey area in the co-ownership contract, and built protections for my assets. Then I contacted a locksmith, changed the codes, and installed a security system. Not because I felt unsafe, but because I wanted control again. Control over the one place in the world that should have always felt like mine. Some people would say it was an overreaction. That I should have talked it out, given grace. But grace doesn't mean allowing yourself to be walked over. Grace means knowing when to let go and when to stand your ground. Ethan tried to reach out, of course, multiple texts, a few voicemails. All laced with a careful mix of guilt and gaslighting. Mom's really upset. She thinks you're being dramatic. Claire didn't mean to hurt your feelings. You know you're always welcome, Lauren. You just make it hard sometimes. Each message was a reminder of how little they understood. Or maybe how much they did and how little they cared. But I didn't respond. I let my silence speak louder than any argument could. And then, as if the universe had been watching and waiting, it gave me something else. An email from the International Biomedical Research Institute in Geneva. They had seen my presentation in Chicago. They were expanding their research division. They wanted to speak with me about a 3-year appointment. I stared at the message for a long time. 3 years in Switzerland. A chance to step into something new, clean, and dignified. A life that wouldn't require me to justify my value every time I walked through a door. I wasn't running away. I was stepping into alignment. And suddenly, the betrayal that once felt unbearable became the push I never saw coming. The final, painful nudge out of a house that had never been a home and into a future I could finally claim as my own. It's strange how peace doesn't always come in the form of quiet. Sometimes it comes in the click of a door locking behind you, the steady shuffle of papers across a lawyer's desk, or the deliberate pause before sending an email that marks the start of a different kind of conversation, one where the heart no longer leads, but the mind takes over. I didn't wake up one day knowing exactly what to do. But after years of being underestimated in my own home, overlooked in my own family, and overrun in the place I helped build, something in me refused to keep shrinking. For too long, I'd been the one smoothing over conflict, staying silent for the sake of peace, carrying the emotional weight for people who barely noticed I was in the room. But peace without boundaries isn't peace at all, it's compliance. And I was done complying. The legal path didn't begin with anger, it began with clarity. After meeting with Barbara, my attorney, and laying out the events, the invasion of privacy, and the documents I found, we crafted a plan that was structured, airtight, and emotionally detached. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to plead for acknowledgement. I was going to protect what was mine and let the law speak in the places where love had failed. The first step was formal notice, a letter sent via certified mail to my brother Ethan, outlining every documented violation of our co-ownership agreement, unauthorized use of private space, hosting a large event without consent, property damage, and failure to maintain shared boundaries. It wasn't written with venom, it was written with precision. Each point supported by photos, dates, clauses. The facts didn't need emotion, they were damning enough on their own. Ethan didn't reply right away. But when he did, it wasn't to me, it was to our mother. The messages began again, text after text. My mother said I was tearing the family apart, that I was being childish, that Ethan was under a lot of pressure, that surely I could forgive one misstep. I was shattering the unity they'd worked so hard to preserve. It's amazing how quickly people call for unity once they've crossed your boundaries. I stopped replying. From that point on, every communication went through Barbara. That decision alone gave me more peace than any family dinner ever had. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be understood, I was simply standing firm. I hired a property management company to handle my portion of the house. Miss Collins, the director, was sharp and no nonsense. We walked through my apartment together, noting the damages, taking inventory, and photographing everything. She never flinched when she saw the broken perfume bottles in the bathroom or the children's drawings still taped to my walls. We've seen worse, she said, but not often in co-owned family properties. You're smart to separate emotion from management. We scheduled repairs, deep cleaning, and began screening potential tenants. I opted for a long-term lease, someone quiet, professional, and unlikely to stir tension. It was less about income and more about reclaiming the space Ethan and his wife had treated like an extension of their domain. Once a tenant moved in, they'd have to coordinate any shared matters through the company. No more hallway arguments, no more accidental intrusions. It would all be managed with contracts, rules, and accountability. Of course, the blowback came fast. Ethan showed up during the inspection one afternoon, furious, trying to block entry. You can't rent out the house without my permission, he snapped. Miss Collins didn't blink. Dr. Mitchell is within her rights as a co-owner. The agreement allows her to rent her private unit through proper channels, which she's done. He turned to me then, and what I saw in his face wasn't just anger, it was panic. I'd stopped playing by the family script. I wasn't engaging in emotional tug-of-war. I wasn't defending myself or seeking validation. I was simply doing what any adult with dignity would do, making decisions based on respect, not relationships. That was the real betrayal to them, not the legal action, not the management company, but the fact that I no longer needed their permission to live a life that made sense for me. When the new tenant moved in, I finalized my travel documents for Switzerland. The Research Institute had offered me not just a position, but a future one rooted in collaboration, purpose, and quiet respect. For the first time, I was stepping into a world where my work wasn't an afterthought, where my voice didn't have to compete to be heard, and still, the guilt trips came. My mother left voicemails saying I was abandoning her, that she couldn't sleep, that I was giving up on my family. Ethan texted me lines like, "You're really going to leave us like this?" As if I had packed a bag and walked away from a loving home. They rewrote the narrative, casting me as cold, detached, ungrateful, but I didn't reply. Because the truth is, sometimes emotional distance isn't punishment, it's protection. Sometimes silence isn't anger, it's healing. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight or forgive, it's to refuse to carry what was never yours to hold in the first place. I left for Switzerland without fanfare. No tearful goodbye, no dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet flight to a new life where the only baggage I carried was packed with intention. In my carry-on was the locket Aunt Grace had given me with the photo of my father from my med school graduation. He never needed me to prove my worth, he saw it long before anyone else did. And somewhere over the Atlantic, as the city lights faded behind me and the unknown spread out ahead, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not peace, not yet, but power. Not the kind that demands attention or control, but the quieter kind. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself, even when it means disappointing the people who never fully saw you. That was the day I stopped asking to belong, and started building a life that belonged to me. It didn't happen overnight, this unraveling of old definitions and the quiet rethreading of something new. Redefining family isn't like tearing down a house, it's more like moving out of a room you never realized you'd outgrown. It happens slowly, at first in silence, and then, all at once, with the steady click of a door that locks behind you and doesn't need to be reopened. Switzerland was everything I hadn't let myself hope for. The Research Institute welcomed me not as a girl trying to prove her worth, but as a woman who already had. My colleagues didn't just respect my mind, they listened, challenged, collaborated. We spoke different languages, but shared the same fluency in purpose. There were no dinner tables where I had to beg for space in the conversation, no silences thick with the weight of being misunderstood. For the first time, I was in a room where I wasn't shrinking to fit. In those first few months, I breathed differently. Not deeper, just freer. I built a rhythm that belonged only to me. Work in the day, walks by the lake in the evenings, long conversations with people who knew nothing of my family and asked nothing of me except presence. I kept my past in a drawer, only opening it when absolutely necessary. I answered emails from the property manager. I forwarded legal correspondence to Barbara. I ignored everything else. But family doesn't go quiet just because you do. The messages kept coming. My mother's texts were erratic, fluctuating between fury and fragile guilt. Ethan's, at times, sounded almost like regret, though they never quite crossed that line into accountability. "Claire's pregnant," he wrote one night, weeks after I'd stopped responding. "I keep wondering what kind of father I'll be. I don't want to repeat our patterns." I read it twice, then a third time. Something in me softened, but not in the way it once would have. I didn't feel the urge to run back, to repair. I just felt the quiet ache of distance, the kind you choose, and the kind that's chosen for you. My reply was simple: "Congratulations. I wish you both well. I'm focused on my work now, and I hope you're focused on becoming the kind of father your child deserves." He didn't reply. Still, over time, the tone of communication began to shift, fewer accusations, more questions. My mother wrote once, "Maybe we didn't try hard enough to understand you. Maybe we didn't want to." That maybe carried more weight than any apology ever could. When Kevin eventually made a formal offer to purchase my half of the house, it came not with coercion, but with clarity. He had secured financing. The terms were fair. There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda, just paperwork, just resolution. I agreed, under one condition. A portion of the proceeds would fund a scholarship in our father's name for young women in science. It wasn't about legacy, it was about rewriting the narrative. Selling the house didn't feel like surrender. It felt like closing a chapter that had taught me too much to ever regret. I had loved that house once, not for what it was, but for what I hoped it might become, a place of belonging. In the end, it became the mirror I needed to see myself clearly. I returned to Boston briefly the following spring for a research conference. The air smelled like memory-wet sidewalks, burnt coffee, a city that once held my entire identity. I agreed to meet Ethan, Claire, and their newborn daughter, Emily, for dinner. My mother joined too. It was strange, seeing them all again, not painful, just distant, like stepping into a version of life that no longer fit. There was no big confrontation, no cinematic apology, just conversation, clipped and cautious. When Ethan handed me Emily to hold, her tiny fingers curled around mine, and for a second, something old and familiar flickered in my chest. She had our father's eyes. That quiet kindness, that searching curiosity. My mother noticed it too. "James would have adored her," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I think he would have been proud of you, too," Ethan added. "The article said your treatment could save thousands." I nodded, not out of modesty but acceptance. It's early, but promising. Later, when we stood outside the restaurant, my mother hesitated. "Will you come by the house before you go?" "I have meetings," I said gently, "but maybe breakfast before my flight." We didn't hug, we weren't ready, but we didn't look away, either. And that, in itself, felt like progress. That night, I sat by the hotel window and thought about everything that had changed, not just in them, but in me. I no longer needed their approval. I didn't carry their judgment like armor. I wasn't waiting for them to become something they weren't capable of being. I had stopped grieving the family I didn't have and started accepting the one I did, flawed, fragmented, but no longer allowed to define me. Family means forever, the banner at the reunion had declared. Maybe it's true, but not in the way they meant it. Not in shared blood or forced obligation. Family means the people who see you not the version they've created, but the truth of who you are. And sometimes, those people aren't the ones you were born to. Sometimes they're the ones you find later in conference rooms and late-night lab sessions and quiet lakeside walks. Sometimes family is a choice, and sometimes the bravest choice of all is to walk away from what breaks you even if it once called itself home. I left Boston with no promises, no expectations, just peace. And on the plane back to Geneva, I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence that had taken me a lifetime to understand. I am not who they said I was. I am who I chose to become. In the end, this wasn't just a story about betrayal, it was about awakening. It was about a woman who spent most of her life trying to be good enough for the people who were supposed to love her without question. It was about how quiet rejection, the kind that hides behind polite smiles, family dinners, and unspoken hierarchies, can leave scars deeper than any obvious wound. And it was about what happens when that woman finally realizes she doesn't have to earn her place at a table where no one ever truly saw her. Lauren's journey wasn't defined by one dramatic moment. It was built on hundreds of small ones. Each time she was overlooked, each time her accomplishments were ignored, each time her privacy was invaded in the name of family, and for years, like so many of us, she stayed, she tried, she hoped. Because that's what we're taught to do, to keep showing up, even when we're invisible. But love without respect is not love. Family without trust is not safety. And forgiveness without accountability becomes a trap. What Lauren chose to do was not walk away from her family out of hatred, she walked away to reclaim herself. She chose dignity over dysfunction, clarity over chaos, and healing over history. She stopped arguing with people committed to misunderstanding her and stopped shrinking to fit into roles that were never made for her in the first place. She chose peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't require permission. There is a kind of grief that comes with letting go of what you thought your life would be. But there is also freedom, freedom to rewrite the narrative. Freedom to define love and family in your own terms. Freedom to protect your space, your energy, and your worth even when it disappoints those who once claimed to care for you. That's not selfish, that's survival. And sometimes, the most generous thing you can do for the world is to stop pouring into people who only take. To stop sacrificing your light to keep others comfortable in their shadows. To choose the life that brings you joy, even if it means closing the door on a past that never did. The lesson here is simple, but powerful. You are not obligated to stay in places where you are mistreated just because those places are labeled home. You are allowed to outgrow people, even if they raised you. And most importantly, you are allowed to protect your peace, even when others call it distance. How do we apply this today? Start small, set one boundary that honors your well-being. Say no where you used to say yes just to keep the peace. Write down what respect looks like to you and ask yourself if you're surrounded by it. If not, it might be time to reevaluate which relationships are truly nurturing and which ones are simply familiar. Family is not about DNA, it's about safety, it's about reciprocity. It's about being seen, heard, and loved as you are, not as who someone wants you to be. And if you're sitting in silence, wondering if you're the problem because others don't appreciate your efforts, let this story be your reminder. You are not the problem. The problem is the system that asked you to disappear in order to belong. You don't have to disappear anymore. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to begin again. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship, even a family one, for the sake of your peace? Oh yes, and it was painful but necessary. B. Not yet, but I've thought about it. Please feel free to share your answer in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage they need. And if this message touched something in you, please subscribe to the channel to support this kind of honest, real storytelling. If you feel moved to do more, your donation, no matter how small, helps us continue creating content that speaks to the soul. I may be getting older, but I'm more determined than ever to spend my time doing something meaningful, and your support makes that possible. Thank you for being here. Let's keep learning, growing, and healing together.